Good afternoon everyone and welcome to video update number 9. Here we are again at the end of another partial lockdown week, and as ever I hope you're all well and staying safe. A number of you have asked me where my video was last week, and it's good to see some of you are actually interested in my update and nice to feel wanted, although now some of you were actually probably just checking on my hair and how long it's got over the last few weeks. As you can see, it is getting much longer. My family have suggested I actually cut my hair, or they offered to cut my hair for me. I am using these video updates as an excuse for them not to do this, because I want to carry on looking as best I can for camera rather than what they do to my hairstyle. Anyway, I couldn't do a video last week as my director, my producer, my daughter, unfortunately she's broken her phone, so we are using a temporary different phone today, but hopefully recording is just as okay and good for your viewing. In recent days it's been good to see that we are starting now the easing of lockdown, and we are able to do more than what we could a few weeks ago. Sadly though, the weather has also changed in recent days, meaning we can't meet in the gardens like we have been over these last few weeks, but hopefully summer will return soon. It's amazing to think now that we are now almost 3 months down the line of lockdown. Time seems to have gone really quickly. Thankfully though, we seem to be coming through the worst of this crisis that erupted back in March, and we are now looking to see how we adapt to life with restrictions and how we can return to the new normal. It's not ideal, but at least we are looking ahead now as opposed to staring into the black hole we were back in March. Remember those days? The supermarkets were empty and toilet rolls were a rare commodity. As we are now in June, I thought it'd be good to share some more positive news with you over your portfolios that virtually all of my clients are invested into, and also provide a brief update on the current market situation. As ever, there's also an interesting fact at the end which will gain evidence of magnitude of change we've seen in recent weeks, so if nothing else it's worth waiting until the end. You will recall the various asset areas that your portfolios are invested into and how they've all been challenged in these last few months. If you recall my first ever video when I was updating you on the tremendous falls we had seen in the stock markets and urging you to stay calm, explaining you were in a well diversified portfolio. Since those bad days, let's look at the various asset areas that make up your portfolio in terms of how they have performed further during May. Looking at this graph, you can again see good positive returns from almost most asset areas during May. High returns again from equities, adding to those seen already in April. It's interesting again to see good positive returns coming from Europe and Japanese stock markets, as well as the dominant US stock market as well. But look now how the US stock market is now showing positive returns since the start of this year, wiping out the huge losses back in March. It's an amazing turnaround, isn't it? Emerging markets have lagged somewhat in the last few weeks, mainly because their countries and economies aren't as well insulated and what our governments can do to try and help companies and also people through this virus problem. The UK stock market, the FTSE 100, again on this graph shows it is lagging that of its counterparts. This graph does show the FTSE 100. If you didn't know, this is an index of the top 100 companies in the UK in size of capital. As I mentioned, the FTSE 100 shows the biggest 100 companies in the UK in size of capital, but many of those companies include oil stocks, commodity stocks and energy stocks as well. We know in recent weeks and months that their share prices have been really challenged and have gone down significantly. Also included in the FTSE 100 includes companies involved in travel, and again we'll talk about more about travel and airlines later. Also again this week we've also seen the word appear again about Brexit. It is still ongoing, and there was a warning already from this week from the Bank of England suggesting that banks need to prepare for a no-deal Brexit. Looking again at this graph, I mentioned oil price, and this shows how much oil has dropped during March, but equally in April and May how much the oil price has come back. But look how far it is still down over the year to date. With the oil price so low even now, this price is not sustainable for many oil companies, and more measures will need to happen in coming weeks. The good news though is your portfolios with True Potential are multi-asset and would have investment capital spread across all these different areas and others. With multi-asset funds, there is always opportunity in whatever markets we find ourselves in, good and bad, and positive returns can come even at the harshest times. I've shown you this graph before, but again it proves how less volatile things are generally in the stock markets. The VIX index, which you should remember from previous videos, shows the perceived volatility, or call it fear, within the equity markets. This graph shows again updated figures showing you how much that fear factor has fallen in recent days and weeks. This now shows a level back down to almost normal compared to previous years. Again, compare the height of that fear factor back in March when panic seemed to be taking over. Things do seem much calmer now. Before we look at the returns in your portfolios, what else has happened in this last week in terms of investments? There has been more support announced from Europe and other central banks around the world. Governments and banks looking at ways to stimulate the economy further with really interesting ways of trying to kickstart the economy in those countries. Keep your ears peeled here for maybe more interesting information coming out from our own bank to try and see how they can kickstart the economy too. Equity markets have really loved this input from banks and governments around the world, and that's been another trigger why the markets have done so well in these last few days. Another reason is that lockdown is generally lifting globally. It's not back to normal, but how we move through the next few steps is interesting to see what's going on. It's heartening to see in Europe that cafes are reopening outside, and there's even talk of tourists returning to certain parts as well. On the negative side, there are clear issues with Trump and China, which does have an impact on Asia as well. There's also a lot of political unrest as well. We've seen demonstrations this last week. And also, as I mentioned before, Brexit is now starting to come back into the news once again. These pockets of news at the moment are not causing major disruption in the stock markets, but we need to keep a watch on those in the coming weeks. So for your information, here we are with some information now about your True Potential portfolios as of the end of May. Most portfolios are now showing positive returns over the last 12 months. They may well still be down from that in February, but take heart, the recovery has been strong, so we're now mostly back to levels we saw around about a year ago. If you look at your portfolios, think how much these had fallen back in March. At one stage, all portfolios showing double-digit losses during March, but since then, the rapid bounce back. With any investment though, you must always look at the longer term performance. And again, since launch in October 2015, the figures for each portfolio show returns that we would expect on average. And that does include some periods of some big falls in the stock market, as we've seen in recent weeks. But if we look at those returns over a period of 5 years, those returns are good and above what you'd expect to make from a normal bank savings account. Hopefully now, when you see and hear the values, you are happier than where we were a few weeks ago. Of course, we still can't predict what lies ahead, but what you can see is what goes down does come back up. Lastly, as promised, here is today's interesting fact in terms of the value of companies. For many of us, 3 months ago, the technology company Zoom in the main was an unknown. No one had used it, no one actually knew it existed. I know for sure I didn't. Now since lockdown, I use it daily for client meetings. We catch up with family on it. We've even hosted quiz evenings on this device, and even church services are streamed week by week using Zoom. No doubt many of you too have used it during these lockdown weeks. This chart here shows how many people were using Zoom back in December 2019. Back in December, which does seem a very, very long time ago now, only 6 months ago, it shows around 10 million people per day were using Zoom. Now look at that graph now. In March, we saw a huge jump to 200 million people, and now in April, over 300 million people use Zoom every single day around the world. Now that's amazing, but aren't we also fortunate that we do have technology to help us get through these lockdown periods? There's been massive growth in that company, but equally more amazing is the value now of Zoom as a business is worth more than the 7 biggest airlines in the world. Of course, the airline share price has fallen dramatically, but it still shows the scale of one company being in the right place at the right time against more traditional companies that have been hit due to the lack of travel. Oh, to have brought some Zoom shares a few months ago. The start of the year, Zoom's share price was around $68. Today, as I checked a few minutes ago, they were trading over $200 each. Amazing. Anyway, hopefully another interesting fact for you to share with your family and friends. As ever, it's been good speaking to many of you over this last week via phone, via Zoom, via FaceTime and other devices. It's good to be able to carry on doing business in these challenging days. And I thank you for keeping me busy too. As ever, if you've got any questions whatsoever or feedback on future videos, please let me know. And for now, have a good weekend. Thank you.